Hello all, welcome to week 11. This week we're looking at ageing and social work, as you'll know from your modules. So, what do we mean when we talk about aged person, and what does an aged person look like, and where do they live? So I took this question actually to my online clip art search, and I came up with these results. And what does this suggest? What are these stereotypes that are at play here? Is this how we categorize those who are aged within our population or older people in community? It's really interesting because I think there are some pretty strong stereotypes there, and as social workers and human services professionals, we know that we mustn't adhere to those stereotypes, and we must challenge them as well, and work towards empowering individuals. And I think in a lot of these images, it's quite the opposite. It's almost disempowered. So today's lecture is really going to look at the role that social work and human services plays in aged care and with older individuals, as well as looking at the demographics around age. I'll link in as well with the assignment question for this topic as well. So I think a really important idea that's cited within the literature is that aging and disease should not be equated. Its actual statistics are that less than 25% of elderly people, those over the age of 75, have a disability that requires outside assistance. However, thinking back to those images on the previous slide, there's a lot of falling over, there's a lot of walking frames, a lot of wheelchairs, and is this something that we equate with the aged population? So age does increase your vulnerability to a range of health problems, though difficulties are not inevitable there. Older people do not require social work because of their age, but quite often because of disability, lifestyle and loss issues as they age. So social work responses can be as diverse as the older population itself. Very similar to any life stage, there's not one specific type of intervention in a particular life stage, nor is there with our age populations either. So some traditional settings for social work with elderly people has been in hospitals, community health centres, aged care assessment teams, so you may have heard of an ACAT assessment, nursing homes and hostels, as well as community care agencies. But more recently, we've also seen a huge privatisation within this sector. I found this on sort of a Creative Commons online, this picture, but it doesn't look glorious and amazing. A beautiful place to be. And as we know, that's not the case in all residential aged care environments. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in lecture as well. But there has been a huge growth in the private sector, which is of course related to an increased need in this sector and potentially also a decrease in government provision, but we'll talk a little bit about that further on as well. So a little bit of the background. In 1901, there was an agreement on the need for a national support system for aged people. And then in 1909, we saw the advent of what we now know as the age pension commenced. By the mid-1950s, there was an increased federal government funding for expansion in the number of nursing home beds, and aged care was really conceptualised at this stage as a medical problem, and residential care was seen as a standard response to this. There's also the advent at this stage of some more community or domestic support services, such as Meals on Wheels, and developed. In 1975, the Henderson Inquiry into Poverty found that aged people were the single largest group at risk of disadvantage within our society. And I think that really sort of spoke volumes, and we saw a lot of change from that point as well. In the 1980s, there was an increased emphasis on community care models, and a new ideology really emerging that fought for independence and community care, reduced institutionalised care, and some ideals that are really still quite influential today. And that's when your home and community care program started to in the mid-1980s. So, we're all pretty familiar, I imagine, with the changing demographics in society. We hear about this within society, we hear about it within news media, we hear about it in lots of different ways that we have an increasing proportion of aged people within the Australian population. There's an increased awareness concurrently of aged care issues and also a consideration in social policy, more so than in previous eras, and more social work research and practice theory development around aged care and aged populations. So a key example of this is the integration of subjects such as psychology and aging, which a number of you might be undertaking at the moment or within your studies, which looks at, as it suggests, the psychology of aging and other aged care specific subjects within social work and social welfare degrees. But yeah, as well at a government level and a policy level, we're seeing a lot of change. So a few stats, I love popping stats into these sort of things. They paint a really nice picture quite often. These are from, again, the ABS. So there has been, of course, between 2002 and these are projections for future years as well, an increase in a number and proportion of people over the age of 65 years. There's been a number of contributing factors. One of the ones that we most often refer to and that most people are familiar with is, of course, the baby boomer generation, and now getting towards the criteria of being an aged population. There's an increasing life expectancy now and also falling fertility rates as well. The trend will grow over the coming decades to such an extent that the number of people aged over 65 years will increase from 2.5 million to about 7.2 million in 2051. So I'll let you read through those statistics at your own leisure, but they're actually quite alarming. We've for a long while known that we have an aging population. There's an increased number of those within that category of being aged or elderly, but the statistics really speak volumes too. So the aging experience, whilst in 2005 categorised, may be considered with according to a range of variables influence the quality of the life of the aged, including socioeconomic class, gender, disability, ethnicity, diversity, and living in rural regions. In terms of social class, there is little doubt that inequalities experienced over the life cycle continue or even intensify into old age. So I know that assignment 2 is asking you about some of these things to talk about them as well. So it's really important to take into consideration when we're looking at demographics that we're not looking at the age population as a demographic per se in themselves, but that it is made up of gender, disability, ethnicity, diversity, and there's a huge amount of different things that contribute to that demographic. I think it's really important to note that social class structures are still apparent within the age population. I think sometimes we forget that and that they can be intensified. I mean, going back to one of the previous slides where we talk about high levels of poverty and the age population being one of the most socially disadvantaged of all age cohorts within our society. So gender, we know for a fact that women outlive men. It's a worldwide trend, and that as much social policy based on men's experience of aging and, leaving paid employment and what that looks like, and some ideas around parenthood and different life stages and grandparents and having grandchildren, that sort of thing. But we need to really recognise gender as an aspect of aging, as it's often neglected. Like I said, often aging can be conceptualised as sort of a context within itself, and factors of gender not taken account for, or perhaps a lot of the ideas around gender and masculinity is more paid attention to socially and within research. We also need to consider cultural diversity. In 2011, 36% of Australia's older people were not born in Australia, and that's a significant number. We've now seen the emergence of ethno-specific services and culturally appropriate practice guidelines in working with those who are culturally diverse and in an ageing population. There's, of course, a whole new set of psychosocial needs for those who are within the aged population. However, they run really concurrently to the psychosocial needs that can be identified at different life stages as well. So, just rehashing, we did talk about psychosocial briefly in one of the earlier lectures this session, but psycho relating to the psychological needs and social relating to those social or community needs as well. So you can read through those at your own leisure. But I mean, as you can see, a need to stay connected is really integral at this life stage. I mean, it's important throughout life stages, but it can be more difficult in these later life stages. Finding meaning in life and loss and grief issues are quite pertinent for those within our age population and take a specific, different look at things quite often to what we have through different life stages. Something that I think is quite often neglected when thinking about the age population is lifelong learning, hobbies, and education. We seem to conceptualize education as something that's completed quite early in life, in that we do our schooling, we do schooling, we might go on to higher education and then have a career and then have retirement. It sort of seems to be a societal expectation that's the way things go, but I think there's now increasing awareness around the fact that no, we do need to engage in lifelong learning, and there's great merit in getting further education later in life. Personally, I can see tremendous potential in that sector and the need for it, and the importance of engaging in education when you've got that life experience to share and you've got those reflected capacities and different ideas and so many experiences. I think it's just wonderful, and there's huge scope for that. So, just a little bit on policy reform in aged care service delivery. I've got a clip from Lateline there. It's from a little while ago. When you click on the clip, you'll actually see if it asks you if you want to watch in broadband or dial-up. I'm not sure if dial-up's so prevalent anymore, but it really speaks volumes to when the file was uploaded to the site. But look at that and have a reflect after watching that if things have really changed since when the clip was posted. Is our policy reform, have we moved forward with it, or are we still sort of stagnating at the same point? And have a look at the second website there as well for some further information. In terms of policy direction moving forward and issues in aged care in Australia, government's really looking at encouraging self-funded retirement. That would be no secret to any of you. Big push for superannuation, big push for investment throughout the lifespan, all of those sort of things. Really looking at the aged care pension not being a sustainable measure to support all aged people. The continued marketisation of aged care, so the user pays service and community care a cheaper and preferred option. So it's big business, retirement villages, retirement homes, retirement services, and a lot of money and a lot of financial outlay quite often as well, which I'm sure you've all had experiences with. Health promotion for healthy aging, as well as promotion of positive aging. So changing the thinking around those key stereotypes we addressed at the beginning of lecture and really promoting a positive view of aging and of the aged population. So not to go too deeply into the theoretical perspectives today, but they are there and the terms are there for your further research if this is an area of interest or if you're going to be doing it for second assignment. But just I've got 4 core theoretical perspectives which I'll have on the slides and not go too deeply into, but leave them there for you to review, and please jump on the forums and ask any questions if you want clarification around any of these perspectives. What I do want to talk more about though is some particular pressing issues that I think are within aged care for us at the moment. So one of these being mental health in general. I've got as a key thing depression, but I think mental health considerations within our age population often go unnoticed. I think our approach to aged care is often primarily from a medical model or a deficit type model, and looking at sort of those physical needs or those community connection needs and different things like that. We don't often, I think, or often enough, check in and talk about mental health for our age population. So as I said on the slide, it often goes unrecognized and untreated in elderly people. I think the difficulty there too is with things such as dementia and Alzheimer's, there can be sort of a overlap of symptoms and ways of being and different indicators where mental health may be overlooked as a diagnosis for those who are aging. And some might be organic and some might be reactive to situations or experiences for our age population. There's actually a documented peak in suicide rates for elderly males over the age of 75. And that might be alarming or surprising to some of you. We hear a lot about youth suicide. We hear a lot about male suicide in general. We hear a lot about Black Dog Institute and those sort of support organisations, but we don't hear a lot about suicide in elderly males. And it is sort of one of those areas that's not talked about. It's not researched on a lot, but the statistics are there and they are alarming. The other issue is care. So Williams in 2005 talks about how the modern emphasis is on family care, and it's typically recognised as per of the support offered by the family and especially female carers. It's also acknowledged as a product of the retreat from state responsibility for aged care. So basically, that's saying that we do sort of have this underlying emphasis and assumption that family care will be provided and that care is the responsibility of the family and the state doesn't really play a role in care for our age population. But I think from a perspective of social justice and empowerment, we need to be challenging that and we need to be saying, well, look, that's not possible in all circumstances, and state care really, and the state does really need to be playing a role as it does in child protection, as it does in, family support. It needs to be playing a really active role in supporting our age population. So what is the future of social work and human services with their age population? Well, I think the centrality of the biopsychosocial model will be maintained and needs to be maintained. Of course, the bio being the biological aspects, psychological aspects, and the social aspects. It's a quite social work specific model of looking at things, and I think it's a really important model for aged care and what needs to be happening within aged care, not just to focus on the biological only or the social only, but really looking at that psychological element as well and incorporating all of the elements of the model in working with people who are elderly. I think there needs to be, we need to be looking at casework and group work. We need to be looking at working with the individual and with groups. We need to be advocating for social justice and for the marginalised who are the elderly, and awareness of the political context and program reform and political action. We need to be all over that as social workers and human services workers, for want of better wording. We need to be really aware of what's happening in a political and policy domain to be able to effectively advocate for our clients within aged care as well as in general. So what are some of the core social work, welfare and human services roles in working with older people? I've got them all documented here in a bit of detail, but if you have any questions about those things, we have touched on things such as case management and assessment and advocacy within the lecture, and you'll be fairly familiar with the role of counsellor, but also referring. So the system can be quite complex to navigate at times, and social work plays a really important role in all sectors in facilitating and supporting effective referral to appropriate services, and especially so for those within our age population. Specific areas of practice for the human services is within people with dementia. So looking at, again, that medical aspect, looking at that social aspect and that citizenship aspect. Alarmingly, there's an expected increase by the year 2050 to 730,000 people will be suffering from dementia. And I think it's really important for us to get an idea around what that means for our practice with aged populations and what it looks like from a social work perspective. We know what work with dementia looks like from a medical model, but how do we differ from that? What do we do that is different to support those living with dementia, to support the families of those who are living with dementia, to create whole community support, group responses and supports for individuals. Palliative care is another big area for social work, and I think social work and palliative care offers a really holistic response to people with life-threatening illnesses or conditions where there's no cure, and a need for a team approach to fostering maximum autonomy until death. So it's not our role as a social worker to be that only person supporting that individual, but of course the medical model and doctors and nurses play a really important role here too, and we need to work within that team in advocating for our client and supporting our client and being there for our clients. So as I mentioned, social work and human services roles include support. They include looking at things from a systems perspective. So not just looking at the individual, but looking at everything around them as well. The family, the community, and everything that's important in their lives. And counselling as well, of course. Elder abuse is another specific area of practice that's really emerging as quite a significant issue and a really important practice context for social workers. So social work practice in risk assessment, protection planning, advocacy, criminal justice issues and social change, again involving multi-agency collaboration and teamwork, and knowing that the mistreatment of elderly people is widely underreported. So having that knowledge and knowing that and being aware of that and changing and altering the way we work in light of those sort of things. In terms of that, some of you may have seen this in 2013, but it's another clip from Lateline that looks at elder abuse, and it's quite hard-hitting. It talks to families about their direct experiences. So have a watch, but just a precursor that it is difficult to watch. I feel like I need to end on a more happy note, but please there are some other resources here to access if you are interested in this field of practice. It's a really interesting, like I said, emerging field of practice. Social workers have worked in aged care for many, many years now, but as you know, and as you can see from the content within this module, that it is such an emerging area and there's so much growth in this area and need for social workers who are really strong advocates for those who are aged and who know the background and who know the core issues and who are familiar with the policy and can effectively advocate for those who maybe cannot advocate for their own rights. So just some of the references from today as well. I'll flick back to the resources page because that's probably the most pertinent information for you right now. But yeah, ask me any questions on the forums. As you all know, aged care isn't really my area of core practice. However, it is really a strong area of interest, and I'm happy to get some expert knowledge into if that's needed. And I know some of you as well within the class have some experience or working in the field, and I hope that you enjoyed my or the videos within the modules for this week as well, and they helped to shed some light on the topic. So I'll talk to you all again next week when we talk about disability. Thank you. Bye.